Hello, my name is Marisol Sanchez.
I'm Janaiah von Hassel.
And welcome to Chasing Self-Actualization. Today we have Dr. Kate Nooner with us, a professor at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She is an associate dean, and I can't wait for everyone to listen to this episode because we talk about something that I was very passionate about at a point in my life, which is Ashtanga yoga.
Yeah, it was the first I was introduced to it throughout this episode, so I'm excited for our listeners to get to learn a little bit about that. I thought it was really interesting content, and I also loved some of the conversations that we break out into here. I really liked her insight because she works with, college students, and we were just talking about the awareness of, I want to say kids today, but people, younger generations coming up with such an increased awareness around self-acceptance. And I think for both of us, there was a really big impact in today's episode around what that means. Honestly, she broke it down for me in a way that was so much easier to absorb. It was simplified. And I think we really now I'm in retrospect going, wow, I've really complicated this. I had an aha moment, as Oprah used to say. I just feel like I'm like, oh wow, I bet the rest of my life's going to be cooler now. I just felt like this was I'm excited for everyone to listen to her because she just was able to respond so thoughtfully on things and just in minimal words say something that I was like, okay, cool. Yeah. So I think this is a great episode and I'm happy for our listeners.
Yes. When she was speaking about, self-acceptance, I finally understood the idea of radical self-acceptance when she spoke, and that was a big moment. So I hope others glean some knowledge from it.
Have your big moment
with us. And how are you doing? I don't know how many weeks in. I'm always wrong.
Oh, it's been great. I've been loving to hear people's feedback on the episodes and to re-listen to them and have my own renewed experiences with them. And this has just been a really cool experience. So I'm having a lot of fun with it. And any listeners out there, messages on our website. We love hearing about what people are thinking of everything and any topics that you'd love to hear about.
Yeah, let us know. You can reach out to us on TikTok, on Facebook, Instagram. You can follow us on any of those socials, and you can check us out on ChasingSelfActualization.com and sign up for our weekly newsletter where we'll notify you of this week's episode and our guests.
Absolutely. So we hope you enjoy this next episode.
And welcome to the podcast, Dr. Kate Nooner. She is the associate professor at University of North Carolina at Wilmington's psychology department. Did I get it right?
I am the associate dean and a professor of psychology at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington.
We only practiced that half a dozen times before.
No, that I've had many experiences, and once your brain has even a little map of it the wrong way, it wants to go. No, it's true.
Can I admit something? Your first name, that's what's happened to me. In my head, you're in my text as Jay, because when I first heard your name, that's how it imprinted on
Janaiah?
It. I have it as Janaiah. And I always have to stop myself.
My name pronounced so many different ways. That's when somebody goes, am I pronouncing it right? I'm like, oh, say it again. I wasn't listening.
So thank you so much for coming on. It's an honor to have you here. You're a psychologist. That gives us validation because we're not in any way. But chasing self-actualization, the idea of this came in the 90s when I was in a class, Psych 101, Maslow's theory of hierarchy. And I remember at the time just thinking, wow, I'm never getting out of that bottom rung. That's where my head was. And I never heard any more conversation about it after that. It wasn't part of corporate culture. It wasn't part of religious training, nothing. It was just a theory that I never heard about again. But I always thought that it was a secular way of saying self-actualized, being like Buddha or being like Jesus or being like these people in history who have, I don't even know
it's a way of thinking about it in terms of self-acceptance or self-attunement.
Yeah. So what in 2024? What does one think of the theory? Has it been disproven? Is it?
The theory hasn't necessarily been disproven. It was also never proven, but it is a useful concept in many ways for thinking about what you're talking about in terms of just being attuned to yourself, having awareness of yourself. And I think mindfulness is a big term that we use now that conceptualizes a lot of that.
I want to get back to this because, you're here and you're a subject matter expert and we're not. But I want to let you know how we met, because I actually met you through a time in my life where I was studying Ashtanga yoga. Yoga there's 8 limbs of yoga, the truest definition. Am I going out of it?
I mean, I don't know if there's necessarily a definition of yoga. It's part of the Indian cultural heritage and tradition. It's a spiritual practice for some people in India, and it can mean a whole bunch of things related to self-actualization and kind of walking a true path, practicing equanimity, being mindful of where you're at. It's certainly a lot of those things and more.
Choosing my words carefully because I never want to offend anyone, and there's different ideas behind it because, you go to India, some people talk about the 8 limbs, like the meditation. Is it veganism or vegetarian? I used to study
I'm not a subject matter expert in yoga. I'm a forever student. And, I do think you're making a great point related to the fact that we do need to think about cultural appropriation and just giving the reverence to the Indian heritage that it comes from. And doing that is a long way toward not being culturally appropriative. And,
I don't want to offend.
I want to use that.
The right words. Yeah. But this type of yoga, I discovered it. First, I did a teacher training, and in it, they taught about this type of yoga. And it was at the beginning of my divorce, and I was not spiritual. I was still probably a devout atheist. And I cannot give enough credit to that time in my life, the discipline, because it's a discipline. Ashtanga yoga is a discipline that helped me become who I am today. I don't practice it today as I did back then, but I needed it back then. I needed to physically and mentally learn my body, really, I think, and my soul. It sounds
absolutely,
but it really is true. And I remember that when I started in Ashtanga, you start with an opening prayer, and I hadn't prayed in years. And I remember our teacher at the time, Larry Hobbs, just open your heart up, open your mind up to letting what's going to happen. And it broke me down. It was a physical, emotional, spiritual breakdown. Lasted a few years, and I needed it. I needed it to open up this idea of me chasing the best version of myself. How did you come to Ashtanga yoga, and what does it mean in your life?
Yeah, so I started practicing Ashtanga yoga in 2001. I had just moved to San Diego, California to start grad school, and I also had gone through kind of the major breakup of my life. I'm fortunate that I can say that was the one, and it was a while ago, but it was a very life-jarring event. And kind of like the theme of this podcast related to chasing things, I was really looking to be attuned with myself and just find more self-acceptance. And the thing that really drew me to Ashtanga yoga in particular was just its realness. That I was very much, and this is what I was looking for, other people are looking for different things. I very much was not looking for an exercise class or something like that. I was looking for something that would help me check in with myself during that time. And it certainly did that. And, there's different waves and layers to it, like you've said. So I practiced a lot during the 5 years I was there. Then I moved to New York and New Jersey, where I started my career and had 2 kids, and basically didn't practice for about 6 years because it was just, life was happening in a, big way. And then moved to Wilmington and as it happened, I asked someone, and they kind of couldn't believe. They were like, "Oh no, that's Ashtanga yoga." Like, really? And I was like, "No, really." And I went there, and Larry was there, who, to have a teacher who is, as truly dedicated to it in the real way that he is, having gone to India so many times. He's authorized at level 2 in a place like Wilmington that's really a big, small town, is incredibly special.
It's a gift, yeah. He is a beautiful shala here in town, and one of the reasons I'm so particular with the words I'm picking is because I have him in my head, making sure I don't say power yoga, because he didn't like that. But it's an hour and a half, or it took me an hour and a half practice of physical practice, and that's how I learned to actually meditate, because before that, I didn't understand that there was other ways to meditate. I always thought it had to be like a monk style, like you had to sit and just clear your head, and I could never get that. But through that practice, through a moving meditation, it was the beginning of like tasting these things that you hear about. That was a beautiful, beautiful gift in my life, and opened up my life to a whole new world. It's where I started studying, the Bhagavad Gita, the Vedas. Not an expert at all, but I love studying all the different ways people talk about the divine, and I thought it was a beautiful, a lot of similarities.
Absolutely.
A lot of similarities. So what has it meant for you in your life and in your chasing of?
Yeah, I mean, what it's meant for me is, the thing about Ashtanga is you go and there's set sequences. There's a primary series and intermediate series, which is what most people do. There's actually a total of 7, although the 8th series, which I practice as well, and I always like to think about this, and I think it's important to think about in your practice, is being with your family, is caring for your family. So there's many days where that's my practice. I'm doing the 8th series today. I am today, actually, also too. And the primary and all the series are set. And so you might think, does it get boring doing the same series, for years and years? I've been practicing for about 23 years, so does it get boring? And not at all. But it's always challenging, because every single day is different. Things change in little ways, in big ways. It's absolutely not linear. And that is such a useful metaphor for life, in terms of also just not having strong attachments to things. I could do this. I can't do this anymore. I can't do it. Does that mean I'm worse? What does that mean for me? Am I going to give up? And coming back and coming back. It's a very powerful tool to gaining attunement with yourself that then you can apply to so many different things.
Yeah, I remember going into, I think it was a deposition, one of my first depositions, which if you've never been in deposition is horrible, horrible experience. And I'd gone to practice that morning, and Larry grabbed me by my shoulders, and he's like, "You're stronger than you are." And that just played in my head the whole time, and it made such a huge difference. But that was kind of true for the whole practice, because when you start, I'm like, I'm never going to be able to memorize this, much less do it. And then now that's something that no one's ever going to take away from my life. There was a point in my life where I was so disciplined that discipline has carried over into other things, where I'm more disciplined, maybe less on my physical, but more on my mental and my spiritual. So it was a beautiful time in my life that I loved, and I wanted to bring it to the podcast because we talk about spirituality a lot, and I'm just such a believer that it's as individual to a person as their fingerprint, that there isn't one direct linear way to a person's spiritual practices. It is as individual to them as their life experience.
Absolutely.
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
So just listening, and I don't really know. I don't think I've practiced any form of yoga outside of looking something up on YouTube and, checking it out from time to time. But interesting, it sounds like, so it's very repetitious in nature that you're doing the same one. Is this right? The same practice.
Yes.
And then it is similar to, it's like a moving meditation. So is there certain things that you're supposed to be thinking about or aligning with, or expectations that you set to it, or is it not like that?
Well, you're kind of describing all of the challenges. So there's things that it is and that it isn't. And you can make it be a lot of things. At the end of the day, it's really breathing and gaining attunement with yourself. That's it.
Yeah.
But you can make it really big in that it's an hour and a half of different postures, which even in the primary series are challenging. And you can really get your head twisted around that. I think a useful thing about practicing for a long time and not giving up is that you're forced to gain non-attachment with the postures because we get old and things happen.
Your body changes.
And so things that I could do when I started practicing at 24, at 47, I utterly cannot do.
Yeah.
But things that I couldn't do then, honestly, a lot of it related to self-acceptance and breathing and just bringing myself back to the mat, I can do now. And that's the big gift of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So in your personal life, I'm curious, what are some things that have felt very much in alignment for you that you feel you've stepped into and you've been able to wake up to, maybe we'll say, that you might attribute to having this practice that has sort of kept you alert, it almost sounds like, or kept you more in tune?
Sure. I'll say for all of these things, it's a challenge every day. I totally don't have it. I never will.
Yeah.
And some of the things I'm proud of related to it is, I've been married for 19 years. Long-term relationships are really hard. Really, really hard. And I'm married to an amazing person.
Yeah.
And long-term relationships are really hard. So, I think that, practicing yoga, having that practice where I'm really working on being attuned with who I am, accepting who I am, has helped from things just getting tightened up in that relationship.
Yeah.
Also personally related to, and I know Marisol is a content expert on this more than I am, having teenagers. So I have a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old, and so I'm a board certified licensed psychologist, and my area of specialization is children and adolescents. And I haven't been practicing psychology for about 4 years, basically since my administrative leadership roles got so big at the university that you can't do it all. And so I can remember working with clients and really telling them it's really about the relationship. You want to preserve the relationship. You want the kid to come home from their breaks in life and want to have a meal with you. That's what you want.
Yeah.
Whether they're doing this, that, and the third extracurricular. And now that I'm there and I have wonderful teenagers, it's really hard. There's a lot of coming back to yourself.
Yeah.
And the practice of yoga is certainly helpful with that.
Right. I can see that a commitment to any kind of practice like that, where maybe you're in an unpreferred position for a long period of time, is teaching us that we can make a choice and stick with it. And there's just like a logical piece. And then also from things I've learned that there's these different positions that actually open us up and change the way our brain processes things and just allow us to have more connections, to what's going on in our life. So, so what you're doing now in that leadership role, I'm curious. I read a little bit about you, and it was really interesting and noble work I think you're doing. Would you share a little bit about that?
Thank you. So I'm a professor of psychology at UNCW, and like all of us, I wear a few hats, including there. So my professor of psychology role, I direct the Trauma and Resilience Lab, where I do research on the relationship between childhood adversity and later substance use. And that's something that I've been doing for almost 20 years. And I love mentoring students there. I have undergraduate and graduate students in my lab, and that's kind of one of my favorite things to do, is to help them learn about research and how we can answer hard questions meaningfully and how they can learn how to be researchers. And the other hat I wear is as a higher education administrator. So I am an associate dean in the College of Science and Engineering. And that is a leadership role where I am kind of a fixer for a lot of things, is a way to think about it. I am kind of oversee things related to faculty, which can have a lot of wonderful issues and sensitive issues, and policy, which that's kind of dry, but it's very important too. And then related to research and innovation, and that's a new area that we're building out. And so there's a lot of opportunity there.
That's amazing. Your work that is in working with people who have experienced trauma and the connection to substance abuse. Curious, and I'm not sure if this is like outside the scope of that, but within those studies, are there things coming to light for someone who has experienced childhood trauma and, you know, what to do to get yourself on the right track fast so that you're not as susceptible to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it applies to many of us because at least 2/3 of people have experienced some type of childhood adversity. I mean, unfortunately, it's true. For some people, it's more mild. For others, it can be more severe, so things like physical or sexual abuse or things like that. I think the good news is that you can heal from all of it. However, the tough news is that the more chronic and severe it is, the harder it is to climb out, and the more likely, unfortunately, that as you're trying, because you're always trying to climb out, that the coping mechanisms that you come up with that are probably really effective for dealing with those very dark places, when you get out of them, don't really mesh well with the world.
Right.
And so I think one of the challenging things in the area that I study are that some of the solutions that we've known for a while that we hear over and over, from Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris's book, The Deepest Well, which talks a lot about child adversity, and it came out in like 2018 or something like that. It's not a new book. Have to just do with how we choose to structure our society. People don't like hearing that. When it's talked about, there's always a lot of comments like, no, if people would just pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Yeah.
And it's like, these are people without bootstraps.
Right.
But that it doesn't gain traction, even though when you go to other nations that structure things differently, you don't see a lot of the levels of adversity that you see here. Then related to things that do require things like therapy and intervention and things like that, we have really good treatments for it that can help people heal. But there's very limited access to it. You know, there's states in the United States where over 90% of people don't have access to health care, and close to 98% don't have access to mental health care.
That staggers me because I've been in therapy over now 30 years, and I feel I've done Gestalt, I've done talk therapy, I've done EMDR, and I can't imagine not having had that opportunity to go to someone and say, hey, this happened.
I know for myself, there was a point in my life where I have received outpatient care here in Wilmington for alcohol addiction. And an interesting thing that when I was going through the process of how we self-shame for things and how we tell ourselves for the however many years before I reached for treatment outside of myself, it wasn't because I didn't have access. It was because I should be able to stop and I should not be doing this and all the shoulds.
Shitting all over yourself.
Yeah. And I think and also like, how could I let this happen? And so before I understood how your neurology and your trauma can push this on you, once I understood more that this was like a lifeboat at the time that was no longer serving me, I actually wrote a letter to alcohol where I was like, thank you. You know, like there was a time where I don't think I would have gone to work or done the things I needed to do because for a time that was the coping skill I had. But now I don't need you, you know?
I think psychology is just fascinating. I went back to school thinking for a hot minute that I wanted to pursue something, I think it was called applied behavioral science. But in the study of it, I was like, I have too much work on myself that I need to do that I can't help other people. But with this podcast, I do really, really want to help other people just know that you can pursue a better life and heal from your traumas. But it takes work. That's the one thing, like, I've recently had a conversation with one of my kids. I'm like, you can go to 10 different therapists, but if you don't do the work, it doesn't matter. It's not the therapist. You have to do the work. Healing is possible. Like, I think there's this sense sometimes that, you go to talk therapy and how does the healing happen? For me, from my experience, it happened after I left the couch and I sat there with those thoughts, the journal, and took accountability for how I was navigating.
And I think there's probably a lot to be said about being able to trust, to trust that process, or to trust the person telling you.
Oh yeah, I've had horrible therapists.
Because it's interesting, like as you're talking about it, that a lot of trauma can lead to substance abuse, and these are people that their trust has been broken at a very young age.
Absolutely.
And so to say, like, okay, just why aren't you listening? Like, I think this too when we lose somebody to their choice, and we say, like, why didn't they just reach out? And it's like, well, there's a loss of trust, you know? And so everything outside of you feels scary and everything inside of you. So there's, but it's interesting, to hear and I'm curious, like in some of the movements through the yoga you're talking about and some of these processes, like, do you feel that the movements themselves kind of allow some of this stuff to be worked through?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think, what you talked about with writing that letter to yourself is such a powerful act of self-acceptance. And I think the thing about recovery, we're all recovering from something, is it's a forever process. And I mean that hopefully.
Yeah.
That, you can look back and be like, yeah, I was definitely doing better then, but wow, look at me now. Yeah. And even sometimes you may have a tough time, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you are not able to heal again. And I think that's where, yoga is useful in terms of it can explicitly bring those things up just by, doing the postures and breathing, which feels different every single time. So when you do the postures, when you breathe, it feels different every single time, and it should, and in every kind of way, including the not good ways. And that is really also a useful practice space for when you need to do the really transformational things with your family, with yourself. It's just a great way to strengthen those muscles so that you can be more effective when you need to be.
I have a question, because I've heard you mention self-acceptance a few times, so I really want to dig into that. Because I've been stepping into self-esteem, like trying to learn to navigate from a place of respecting myself. So self-acceptance, what is that? Talk to me about that. What does that mean? Because I don't think I've done that. I'm working on stuff, but I haven't thought to accept myself.
Yeah. Self-acceptance really has to do with just saying, I'm okay the way I am, but where I draw it from, so I do feel like learning how to do therapy within psychology is a superpower. The type of training that I'm grounded in is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is just how your thoughts and behaviors influence your emotions and kind of how they all impact each other so that you can tune into one of them to help modify the others in ways that's useful to you. And there's therapies that came from that, and one that I've used a lot and is useful for substance use recovery is called dialectic behavior therapy, which is basically just how two opposite truths can coexist. So you can accept yourself, I'm totally good as how I am, and I still need to try harder and do better. Okay. I think for a lot of, a lot of the time, especially the way we are in our culture as women, that the try harder, do better piece is a given. It's like, oh, of course I do. Please let me get the list out of all the things that are wrong with me. The acceptance part is hard. Yeah. It's like, wait, but I have my list of all the changes. And it's like, that's right, both.
As you were talking, I was thinking about, because you work with college students, I do feel that this younger generation might have a little bit more sense of who they are, maybe than myself as a Gen Xer. Because the way this younger generation seems to be, no, I'm not going to exchange my life energy for 40 hours a week. It's a breath of fresh air, but it's also very new. At least it feels like to me. Is that what you see with the college kids?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, there tends to be, I don't know, people always have that like kids today, attitude, and I don't feel that way at all.
I don't either.
Myself as well. I feel like very happy about the next generation, and even my 14-year-old, when I do something just out of habit, I said to him the other day, he didn't go with his dad to go swimming. My husband took the other boys. He didn't want to go. He was playing video games. And then I said, why didn't you go swimming? You've been sitting here playing video. And he goes, well, if I had known that I would be shamed and it wasn't an actual choice, I would have gone. And it blew my mind, but I didn't realize that's what I was doing. It took me out of, and I was like, that's so true. We could have.
How great that he could articulate that to you.
I said, that's great. Like, I didn't recognize that, and I'm so glad you saw it for what it was. And some people would say, like, how dare he talk that? How dare he have such great awareness? But I thought it was fabulous. And I didn't think like that when I was a kid. I was like, I am a piece of shit. Thanks for bringing it to my attention.
Thank you for validating my
yeah.
Absolutely. And certainly, the great thing, talking back is a very interesting thing because we want our kids to be able to vigorously stand up for themselves in certain settings, but then we want them to absolutely not in others.
Right.
That's not a thing.
Yeah. When I was a kid, the thing always said to me was, it's not a debate.
Right.
So I was like, I will never say that. Of course, now, like, I have kids that just negotiate everything, but that was like a conscious choice that I was like, let's talk about it, that I didn't ever want it to be like that,
Yeah, I have a lot of hope with this new generation. I think there's a lot of fear with the technology, and I know that we're fighting for our attention constantly, but I just feel, I have so much faith that they're going to take this new information and filter it and apply it better than my generation did. I feel like that's...
Yeah, I agree. I know in talking to the students in my lab, we meet once a week for a lab meeting, and there's about 15 students in my lab. And every semester we read a book, a good old paper book. I mean, you can buy it however you want, but, and to really facilitate discussion around a whole host of issues. And I always am pleasantly surprised when so many of them say, yeah, I deleted this or that app off of my phone because it wasn't serving me.
Yeah.
And I do feel like that they are valuing things like work-life balance. They're valuing things like being their authentic selves in a way that certainly I also, grew up in the 90s wasn't something that was even on the table.
I said to my cousin recently, I was like talking about menopause, starting menopause, and she's like, who has time for that? Like, she's a little bit older than me. In other words, push through, don't come, like, right. That is how I was raised, like very much Generation X is push through and get it going. And that's hard to dismantle, and what I've found so beautiful about the life experience is the deconstruction of it. It's not necessarily easy while you're doing it, but when you're deconstructing the belief systems that, society put on me, like when I learned that I was a misogynist myself, I mean, it could be blamed on society, but when I understood that and then started listening to how I spoke, even just recently I said something about a couple that got pregnant. The way I phrased it was very like anti the woman, like she got herself pregnant or something, and a friend called it out, and I'm like, I love that I'm growing out of this that I didn't even know was a problem 10 years ago. Like, I didn't even know. So I love deconstruction. And I think this generation is really good about it. Like, they're trying to figure it out faster than we did.
Absolutely. And all of that, I mean, to me, you know, thinking about your theme, chasing self-actualization, that is self-actualization. Mm-hmm. I know it was one of the very famous Buddhist monks, like Thich Nhat Hanh or something like that, was in an interview and asked, like, when do you practice mindfulness? And he said something like, I practice it all the time. And I thought initially, like, okay, you know, like, well, you're a monk, you're amazing, you're this famous monk. And then the more I sat with it, I kind of gained awareness of how that's possible. Mm-hmm. Just, you know, he is really there in the present moment for what is coming up, which is really hard a lot of the time. And I think self-actualization is similar in that we're actually we can always be there just as much as you could never be there.
Yeah. I feel like I can taste it. Like, I've had moments of something triggers me and I'm not triggered. Like, something that would normally trigger me, I can very quickly get myself to a place of, I was a very unhappy, non-spiritual person. And in chasing that and saying, oh, something's not right, I need more, I want more, that was what took me down this branch of life, which is why I'm here. So,
and it's a tremendously hard thing to do. You know, like mindfulness, which I try to think of in the simplest way possible. So basically, kind of intentionally paying attention to the present moment and doing it non-judgmentally. It's so hard.
It is so hard.
Because we're basically wired to be judgment machines. And that's useful for us in a lot of ways. And part of our judgment machines is if you're trying to practice mindfulness yourself, at least, you know, what I talk about a lot of time is just basically putting the equivalent of like a sheet of paper between you and your thoughts, you know. So rather than saying like, that person stinks, saying, I'm having the thought that person stinks. And you're like, oh, that's ridiculous that you would do that. But actually it creates this mental space without negating yourself where powerful things can happen.
Love that. I love that because I think one of the ways we spiral in this idea that if I'm triggered, meaning there's shame in how I'm feeling, I'm only feeling this way because I experienced something before and I shouldn't feel this way. And if I was self-actualized or healed or well, I would be fine with this. When maybe that's not even true. So like this, as you're saying, like to put this space of like, I'm feeling or I'm having a thought of this, and then just because there's a little bit of a distance there, I don't have to relate it to a lot of things. I don't have to go deep into a story. I can just have a thought.
Right.
And I kind of do that. I do that with a lot of my emotions like anxiety or and I do it with like getting really, if I'm like really particular about somebody bothering me because like they scooped their peas or something so stupid, and then I can get like kind of lighthearted and laugh about it, like that silly version of me that's bothered by everything, instead of judging it and being like, geez, why am I like this? You know?
See, I'm the opposite. I'm the deep, like if I'm judging someone, I've learned that that's saying something about myself. Somewhere I read it. It's not an original thought. If you're judging someone, there's 3 fingers pointing back at you. And I've taken that on as a practice. And that's because it's like, why am I judging this person? And then when I go into the story, I'll figure out it's something me and it has nothing to do with this person. And that's almost like a practice that helps you not want to judge people.
Absolutely.
Because you don't want to deconstruct any more about yourself.
Right. It's not useful.
No, it's not. It's sitting there wasting energy thinking about, why did this person trigger me? Like, you know, why do I have such strong emotions? It's always something about me, so that I'm feeling this way. And learning that I can change that thought, not attach any strong feelings to it, it's a practice. It's not something.
It's a continual practice. And I would say that you're self-actualized when you're doing that. I don't see being self-actualized as a place of perfection or a place of
godliness,
being supremely awesome. I see it as kind of showing up unvarnished as you over and over and over again, which is really
that's hard.
It's really hard.
It's really hard, especially if you don't know who you are, which I'm in my 50s and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface.
Yeah. I mean, I always find one of the hardest questions to when students come and interview, like prospective graduate students, the common question they ask, and you can keep asking it, friends, is, what is your mentorship style? And that's a
tough one.
I always say, ask my students. I don't know what I'm like. I'm like, I try not to be super mean or anything. I mean, I try to be a nice person, but it's very hard to know what I'm like.
Yeah. And I think I mentor people differently depending on what their needs are,
Absolutely.
Because some of the people I mentor need, a cheerleader. Some of them need an accountability partner. It's very 100%. Different.
It's an awesome point. Yeah.
When you were saying you show up unvarnished, are you saying self-actualization for you is being authentic, showing up as yourself without allowing the wounds to define you? Are you saying like you're kind of reaching back to who you would be had you not needed to protect yourself?
I think,
or if you were not trying to protect yourself, I suppose.
I think maybe something just simpler than that, just showing up as I am in this moment, showing up where I'm at right here and now today. And today may be a day that because various things are happening, I'm thinking about this or that and more. And rather than going down I should, and I worked on it, and this is where I am today. This is my day today. Not a lot more than that. And also trying to be able to be as genuine as you can. I know like being an associate dean, we have a whole team that works with us, and being in a leadership position, people are just kind of naturally deferential to that, which is nice. It's also kind of weird because we're all just people. Sometimes when someone says something self-disclosing, like, oh, when I made this mistake or when I did this thing, I feel like part of being self-actualized and genuine is saying, well, when I did that similar thing. So they see, like, I'm a person too here. I appreciate that you're being your genuine self to me. Please don't think that I'm not just as much of a flawed human as you are. I super am.
Oh, I love that. Because, having a titled podcast, Chasing Self-Actualization, is not, again, I reiterate this constantly, it's not because I think I am. It's because I would love to be. Like, I would love to be the best version of myself at all times, but I know I'm not. But I want other people just to plant that seed. Are you being the best version of yourself? And if not, what is it going to take? What do you need? Who do you maybe they'll listen to this and be like, I need to radically self-accept myself. Because when you were speaking, I was like, I think that's what they term radical self-acceptance. Yeah, self-acceptance. I was like, oh.
What do you think are some things people can do to radically accept themselves? And I really do love the way that you portray it. It's actually extremely relieving. It's like I hear you talk and I'm like, oh, that sounds really nice.
And when she was talking, I was like, that's radical. And I've heard that, but I've not.
Yeah, it sounds nice because I think we are in a place where the collective conscious is very much about a heightened awareness of our actions and how that plays on our children and their children and like the world as we know it. And with that comes like a stronger desire than ever to be this version of ourselves that can have this positive impact all the time and do good. And like a lot of us are like chasing, desiring. And then those days where it's not like you're just not going to hit it. It's like, that is just the human of us. Like there's just,
100%.
And for a minute I did life coaching. It was the greatest thing I ever did. I had no business doing it, but what was great about it is that I was talking to, like I had imposter syndrome because I'm talking to people that were so much further in their career and in their finances and this and that. But I'm listening and I'm like, you guys, like I'm the one getting coached. I'm like, oh my gosh, they have all the same problems as me. We all have the same, we're going through such similar things. And yet we esteem some as like being above it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, we all feel like imposters a lot of the time. And self-acceptance doesn't mean approval of everything that's going on in your life. So I think separating out those things is useful. It's kind of like that sheet of paper of just kind of laying it down. This is where I am, and I accept it. It doesn't mean, oh, well, this is me forever, imprinted, nothing's changing. But it does mean that I have awareness, and I'm going to try to be as non-judgmental as possible about where I am now. And, a lot of what that looks like is very simple. I think that's one thing also, that people make things bigger than what they are, which is harder. It's more like, oh, I'm having that judgment again. I'm doing it again. I'm doing it again. Just noticing. It's really, it's really just noticing.
I could see now, like listening to you, how Ashtanga can help with the self-acceptance, because you have physically, mentally, and spiritually self-accept yourself every single day when you show up to the mat, because every day is different. Every practice is different. And I can see how that ties into each other. As you were saying
that too, it was bringing to my attention I have a 12-year-old who's non-speaking on the spectrum. And I think when he was about 6 was when, because prior to that I was like, how do we like reverse this or, fix this, was like kind of this notion in my head as like a new to this and, having the wrong concepts and ideas, but just a mom who's like, what are we going to do?
That's right.
And there was a point where acceptance is the perfect word, because I never felt like there was anything he can't do. And I still know he continues to blow my mind. He's such a cool kid, and he's learning new ways to communicate and show us how much he knows, and it's fascinating. But none of that was available to me, I guess, until I could accept that this is what this is, and let it be that, and then allow it to show more to me. Like, and in that we still had things we want for him. So acceptance was never like a limitation. It's so beautiful, really.
Absolutely, and it's something that you're always working at. You don't have it in the same way every day, because all sorts of different things are happening. Sometimes it's a lot harder to do. Sometimes it's easier to do. And so it's like self-actualization. I mean, I think it's okay to say you're self-actualized, because I see it as always a work in progress. That really just you're on the road. Not
what's stopping me is my Catholicism. I mean,
I'm in agreement with that. When Marisol and I one time she's like, I am not self-actualized. I was like, I am. But by no means do I think Marisol is as well. I think, how do you not be? If we believe, and I don't mean to, this is the name of our podcast. We got to go with it now. but
we're branded.
But I so strongly feel like us 3 women in this conversation, this is a self-actualized moment. Do I think that we are never offline, so to speak? Of course we are. But I also don't think there's anyone, and I didn't hang out with Jesus and Buddha and everybody, but I feel like everyone's had a moment.
So probably. Well, I appreciate the reason we do this, and the reason I started the podcast is really because I feel that I want to change the world, which in and itself sounds like this big idea, but it's not. Like it turn on the news. The world needs help, and I would love the younger generation not have to wait till their 40s and 50s to figure out, oh, I'm gonna radically self-accept myself, self-love, heal my. I want people to start doing it now, so I feel that maybe collectively, a generation from now, we could be in a better place. That's where my hope lies.
Absolutely, and I think that's a beautiful thing. And I also think that if they're fortunate enough to get it in their 40s or 50s or 60s or 90s,
that's great too.
That's incredibly fortunate.
Yeah.
And we are always chasing it, but that's part of it. Just staying on your mat, staying in the game. Is what it's about, because it's very, very hard to do.
I think the human experience is that you are constantly trying it. We're not perfect, and we're going to die.
Not at all. And yes, that too. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming. And if you want to learn any more about Dr. Kate Nooner, you could follow her on her LinkedIn. All of that will be on our show notes. And thank you so much for coming and sharing.
It's great to meet you.
Thanks to both of you. It was great.
And that is another episode of Chasing Self-Actualization. Thank you for joining us. Please make sure to like and subscribe and follow us for more information.
And to learn more about our guest or what we're doing next, you can check out our website at ChasingSelfActualization.com.